Afternoon and welcome to today's webinar with the RSL and Services Clubs Association on business efficiency, staff, systems and security. My name is Margot Smith and I'm the CEO of the RSL and Services Clubs Association. This Eveleigh webinar series is an ongoing series that aims to provide our network with updates and tools and tips on all things relevant to the clubs industry. And we're always very grateful to our corporate partners to bring you insights that can help you with a range of areas. And today's one is business efficiency. Today I'm joined by Clayton, Eveleigh, who's partner audit at BDO, and George Economou, Director of Audit, also from BDO. I'm joined by Greg Russell, partner at Russell Corporate Advisory, and Melissa Marsh, Managing Director, Australia New Zealand at Glory Global Solutions, Australia Proprietary Limited. I'll just ask each of our panellists to share how they work with the clubs industry in case you're new to one of our webinars. So I might start with yourself, Clayton and George, and then move to Greg and then Mel.
Thanks, Margot. I'm Clayton. This is George. Obviously, we work quite closely with a number of registered clubs from an audit perspective, but obviously we've been involved, provide lots of different accounting and advisory services to the industry. So long association, both with the RSL and Services Clubs Association, but also with the industry. Both of us are auditors, but I guess we also, with a number of clients in the space, sort of help our clients with a lot of other areas as well and general advice in the industry. So, yeah.
Thank you. Greg.
Thanks, Margot, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to you and the association, Margot, for giving me the opportunity to speak. We've, as a firm, been involved with the club industry for many, many years. It's probably getting to be a frightening number now, approaching nearly 30. There's probably a message in that. But the things that we concentrate on as a firm are strategic advice, looking at projects, feasibility studies, forecasting, and we're doing a fair bit more in the licensing space at the moment, to the extent that you can when you deal with the regulator that we've got. But apart from that, general advice to the industry, long-term involvement with the association and the industry generally.
Thanks, Greg. Mel.
Thanks, Margot. So I'm Mel, and Glory has been in and around the club industry for a number of years, although not really known in the Glory brand. So we've been working through a number of partners in the cash automation technology space, so helping sort of the efficiencies around process improvement, automation, software solutions. We are direct from the manufacturer in now, and we've sort of got a whole host of solutions to help you with efficiencies in your club.
Thank you. That broke up a little bit for me. Was that okay for everyone else?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, well, so business efficiency, staff, systems and security. I think at the moment we've got a pretty tough regulatory environment. The cost of living's increasing, any development costs have gone up. There's a lot of pressure, labour shortages, all of those sorts of things. So here at the association, we want to provide our network with opportunities to look at how they can do things more efficiently across these areas. But what I might do is start with a bit of a broad brush question. And Mel, I might start with you because we finished with you before. In terms of trends, what are you seeing across our industry and more broadly that we need to think about relative to clubs?
Yeah, so I think when we were talking about trends and what we're seeing, because we can see sort of across a number of sectors, and what's particularly sitting in clubs at the moment, I think, is around labour shortage. And I think there's a number of things that goes with it, whether we can't recruit them in the first place. Once we've got them, how do we retain them as a training and development? We want to be able to see that the staff are doing those value-added activities. And then even with the staff that we've got, there's a whole kind of security and theft around it. We've had some some big customers talking to us literally just in the last sort of 3 weeks or something, and almost every single one, their top one has been around shortage of labour and security and theft. So I think that's sort of some of the key things that we're seeing. And there was even just a report out sort of yesterday talking about the cost of living pressures, particularly in and around hospitality, and so hitting sort of in the club space, you know, and talking about jobs. So I think labour and retention and value add jobs is a really key one for me of what I'm seeing across all industries.
Definitely. And look, those labour costs are so high across all business types, clubs included.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we're having to get more out of less for it. You know, it's kind of, we just sort of did an installation this week, and on the first day they saved 9 hours. Now that's sort of, yes, okay, that's absolutely the financial part of it, but in the clubs, where do we want to see the staff or your staff sort of out there to everyone listening? It's out in front of their customers. It's managing sort of the day-to-day operations, anything that you can just get done and automate. You know, I think we really need to be looking at every single one of part of those processes these days.
And I think we can touch on it later, but I think I 100% agree in terms of where you want to see your staff. It's, you know, that customer focus, those sorts of things. Because when you talk about AI and all of that technology coming down the line, I think, you know, jobs will change, the nature of jobs will change, the nature of systems we use, but it's those human skills that we need to dial up, because that's what people will be looking for. And so automation makes sense where you can to save funds so that your humans can do the human things. Yeah. What about you, Greg? What trends are you seeing across the industry and more broadly?
Look, I think when you look at, I guess, what's happened after COVID, maybe if we talk about what the expectation was when COVID was in play, and the view was that would be a very traumatic period for clubs, and it was very difficult dealing with staff, dealing with all the issues of closure. But what it did do is see the industry reset, and it actually effectively injected oxygen into the industry, because it recapitalised some clubs that were struggling. It let them reset their positions in sort of how they traded. So post-COVID, that position has changed, and I think you know, the cost framework has grown again. There's been some inefficiencies coming back in simply because of the capacity or the perceived capacity to go back to the old ways of doing things. That's been one issue. But apart from that, the actual cost increases with, you know, the core commodities that the industry requires, labour, energy, and I guess a new one, or I guess margins as well, when you look at the cost of goods in supplying a product. But when you look at what else is on the horizon, there are a new group of costs emerging which haven't really, well, they've been there historically, but I think they're becoming more significant, and that's the cost of compliance. The compliance load in the industry is increasing, and, you know, one example recently was this the recent announcement from ILGA on changes to responsible gaming officer roles. One of the large club groups that I work for estimated their labour cost impact of that across the group is north of $1 million. Now, that's the first estimate. Whether that's right or wrong, time will tell. But that's what they see in terms of their obligation, because, you know, they've got some fairly large venues, and the cost impact is potentially significant. So I think that's I guess an emerging issue, the cost of compliance, and yeah, obviously there needs to be some focus on how you can manage that efficiency and try and integrate roles. But some of the requirements of the legislation that's around the compliance regime doesn't always promote efficiency.
So even more important to look for other ways of either dialing up revenue or dialing down costs, or doing just things more efficiently overall. Clayton and George, what are you seeing from a trends perspective across our industry to think about relative to clubs?
Well, look, I think pretty consistent with the comments that are already made, but I think a lot of obviously potential revenue headwinds with all of the the regulator things that are going on at the moment and the focus on gaming and the potential regulation changes, cashless gaming. There's a lot of revenue headwinds, I guess, when you think about that. Plus, then you factor in all the pressure around cost. It just makes business conditions much tougher looking forward. And I echo Greg's point around the compliance. I mean, that's something from our perspective that we're very involved with in terms of seeing the increase when it comes to the cost structures. I mean, we've touched on general compliance and regulatory compliance, but also things like insurance, electricity. Insurance is becoming increasingly costly, and off the back of increased compliance requirements, cyber is likely to become a bigger issue if things move to digital and cashless. So there's lots of cost pressure coming along with sort of uncertainty around the revenue. So I think that's probably the key thing. And I'd probably say the other big trend that I think's coming to hit the industry over the next 12 months, 2 years is really around ESG and expectations, particularly from lenders, employees, and the regulators just around the ESG framework. So that's a big topic of conversation at the moment, particularly for those that have any debt or looking to do any development in the future that may require debt or may just require approval in terms of its sustainable practices. So they're probably the bigger trends at the moment.
Can I just make a comment there, Margot? And that is what Clayton has mentioned around ESG is probably a reasonably significant issue, because I think the availability of finance may become there may be less supply. I'm not saying it will go away, but it will become potentially more expensive. And it's already reasonably expensive. So, where that sits long term, time will tell us. But I think you would be budgeting on the cost of doing business, particularly when you're funding something with debt, likely to go up, because I think there will be a number of ESG consequences where some lenders will say this is no longer an industry that we will engage with at certain levels. So that will only have one consequence, which would probably be an increase in cost.
And so we really need to hit all of those markers in ESG, so the environmental, the social, and the governance. And I think it's really getting a head start on, what can you do to demonstrate your competence and going beyond a tick box exercise in all of those areas. I know, BDO, you're doing some work in that area, aren't you, Clayton? So if clubs have any questions, they can chip in with your team.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to shift back to labour because I know this is something that you flagged previously, Mel, around labour shortages for particular levels and particular types of roles. What have you seen out there?
Yeah, I think it's so I'm seeing that there are even sort of entrants into the industry. If I go back too many years, and even that I can count, when I first got a job, I was happy to do anything and everything sort of everywhere. There were training programs and everything sort of going on and around that. I see that there's more kind of graduates coming in, or even coming out of school and first jobs. I don't think they want to necessarily do the hard yards. It's how we're engaging them. It's how we are developing them for sort of the future plans and retaining them. There's an awful lot more sort of job hopping sort of these days around it. So I think sort of in terms of having those training plans to keep people in place, and any of those just absolute sort of day-to-day processes that can be repeatable or manual, integrating sort of the system so that the work that even at that entry level can be interesting, because the worst thing then you want to happen in the clubs is having the managers then having to do sort of a lot of that day-to-day elements, either because they can't get the people in the first place, or they're sort of not getting the engagement and the buy-in.
Oh, I think that's important in terms of those repeatable tasks and making them automated. I think we as an industry need to always refine our storytelling around what the industry is, what it stands for, what that particular club or corporate partner has to offer as an employer, and then look at those anchors to really cement them in the business. I think it's the first 100 days maybe is super important for employees. So share the vision, share the culture. If the culture isn't being adhered to by either new staff or existing staff, have those discussions, have the tough conversations, because I think there's also efficiencies in, that recruitment and retention piece, making sure that you cement the people in and make them sticky to the business. Also doing that sales pitch of the club or the industry as a career and a profession. And then some of those other staff cultural pieces about, team days or awards and all of those sorts of things. But if it's not going to track, I think when it comes to efficiency, performance management is something that, it will also keep things humming along, because once things start getting a bit wobbly when it comes to team cultures and the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept, I think that's also key to making sure that your people and culture is doing what it should in terms of teams understanding what the expectations are, even in a tight job market. But I think it's super important to be really open and transparent about what the vision is. Is there cost recovery? Is there cost management strategies in place at the moment, and why, and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I definitely think that culture and that openness is so important, and an element of kind of taking away some temptations for elements, bringing staff sort of on the journey and be able to openly say if they're seeing something that they don't quite like or they think is not quite right, being able to talk about it and say that's okay, and having that vision to it. I sort of got a finance background, so Clayton, so hopefully it's all the same terminology, because you talk about sort of audit and controls in terms of sort of a detective control, and then capture it sort of at the end. Clayton, you can pick me up. And it's kind of, I think there's so many sort of other sort of ways of just keeping the staff humming along. It's if you don't sort of have things out there as a problem in the first place, then they can just get on with things as well, and work towards an open culture in the workplace and somewhere that they want to stay, without then having to be sort of big brother issues coming down as well, because everyone's going in the same direction.
Yeah.
Another issue, Margot, though, when you look at like labour shortage, supply, is also the attractiveness of the industry to potential applicants. That sort of goes hand in glove with the image that's being presented by the anti-gaming lobby of what this industry is and does, which is, obviously from our perspective misguided, but it pervades thinking of a lot of younger people that causes them to say, well, that's not necessarily an industry I want to work in. I had a large client in Western Sydney that offered management traineeships, where they paid reasonably high salaries and offered the potential for education. No applicants.
I think that's where it does become a whole of business conversation. So it's communicating what does RG look like at this club or group? What does AML look like when we're engaging with our communities? If it's schools for Anzac Day or for club grants or community groups for club grants, I think it's understanding that we're always on in terms of recruiting for staff. And if schools know about clubs through either commemoration or club grants or anything, I think we shouldn't be shy about saying there are jobs and professions available in clubs, because it's that whole of community engagement piece. I do recognise that expectations are changing and ESG is a big focus for younger people. But I think that's where we do need to explain a whole of business approach for a club or a group.
Well, I think that's where probably the industry in the past hasn't been successful in being transparent around all these things and what they're actually doing. And obviously that those that are well educated or had experience in the industry understand how compliant clubs are in general compared to the rest in the hospitality industry. But it's not well communicated and it's not transparent. So for someone from the outside looking in, they're not attracted necessarily to jumping into the industry because there's not a lot of information for the average person who doesn't understand it. And so the more transparent we can be about the benefits and what's provided by the industry and their views on responsible gambling and other issues that are dominating media headlines, then the better it is in terms of, to Greg's point, being able to attract people to come from outside the industry back in. I mean, I think there was quite a big exodus of people, post-COVID for obvious reasons, and job security. And so trying to attract them back is going to be a longer term play. But I think the more we can, the industry can do to be transparent around it. And, as you touched on, Margot, being more efficient in the day-to-day stuff so that people aren't coming into the jobs being disengaged by doing mundane tasks is also a big part. It's a challenge that we deal with every day in terms of, being in an accounting function too. So that's something that's going to be important.
Okay, I might move to another area, and I'm sure we could talk staff and engagement and industry storytelling all day, so we can come back later if we need to. So let's chat systems and processes. How do you each think clubs can seek efficiencies in their systems and processes?
This is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, Margot. We've had a lot of inquiries from a lot of our clubs over the last 6 to 12 months around what new systems there are, and those are around the accounting function, payroll, purchases, and invoicing and payments. But I think it also extends beyond that as well into responsible gambling and harm minimisation and anti-money laundering. So there has been a big shift in the technology space around those systems and how they integrate so for clubs to gain efficiencies. And I think you mentioned it before around sort of the labour shortage and time pressures for staff. It's really just to sort of alleviate the manual nature of processes and really focus on that review and control. So yeah, I mean, it's something that a lot of the technology companies have been investing in to create those efficiencies. And we're seeing a lot of clubs at the moment transition their accounting systems and other systems to integrate to alleviate those time pressures.
That's a good point, George. So I guess put the technology in place, then the emphasis is on the review and control, not on the doing. So whether or not it's compliance with RG or AML or payroll or payment systems, then it's the upfront work gets done by the system, the checking gets done by the people.
An easy way to put it, Margot, is if you've got to touch the data more than once before you get to the outcome, there's an opportunity for efficiency. However you implement that through AI or systems integration or whichever way you want to look at it, but that's the test. Yeah,
great. Thank you. And Greg, in terms of reporting, and I know, Clayton and George see, work closely with some of those finance teams as well as the leadership team and boards. You do the same. Any recommendations around that area?
When you say reporting, Margie, you mean internally or externally?
Internally, but either. Yeah, but
Look,
internally.
I think making the data meaningful is the key to it, so that the trends are apparent. Even as accountants, I think we're confronted with pages and pages of numbers that you've got to put a ruler on and follow a line across, and then think about whether it's up or down or trending in a certain way. That means that you may not observe something. And observing trends and changes in a business is really about something that's visual. So I think that provided you've got access to the detailed data, and if you're presenting information about how costs are changing in a business and you can see a trend through a report in some sort of representation that is very quick to see, to me, that's the key to reporting, certainly at a management level. A different story for external reporting, but when you're managing the business and trying to drive efficiency, reporting's got to highlight trends without you doing a whole lot of work or a whole lot of thinking. It needs to hit you in the face when you look at the report.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Greg, if I can sort of jump in as well, I think that the key to that as well is getting it in the right time, because there's no point looking at some of that data and reporting if it's already a month too late or 6 months too late. I mean, sort of in terms of, seeing some of those, like the internal trends for each of the clubs, something could have happened as a spike or a jump, and if it's not sort of picked up, it's missed. And with the sizes of some of the transactions going through, you could have already lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sort of before it's sort of picked up as well. So being able to get that data and the software and analytics to see that quickly is such a key point to that.
I agree.
I think
sorry, Clayton.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, generally, there's probably still too many examples of, finance structures and teams where they're probably just doing the wrong tasks for too long. And that's detracting away from their ability to support the business or to redirect their activities to something more important or beneficial to the business. And so, I think these days in implementing systems and operating systems, and the tools and technology that's around, hospitality businesses, even outside of clubs, should be able to be finalising their month-end results within a few days of month-end. They're not complex businesses from a financial perspective, and so. But what we are seeing is like Greg was touching on there, quite a period of time to complete a set of month-end accounts, then another week to put together a board pack that goes and is flooded with information that ultimately means it becomes irrelevant because people can't dive through the details. So, and the amount of time that's being spent on those tasks is really where people need to start making questions or asking questions around whether or not what we've always done is the best approach going forward, because I still think there's elements of we've done it this way always. The board's always seen this information, so we should give it to them again. But I think relevance of information in this environment, as compliance becomes more important, there's more risks around. There is. You can keep adding information into board packs, but it's really, is it actually going to help manage risk? It's probably not. So, I think, making sure the team in and around your internal team is spending the time on the right activities is just as important as well.
How many times have we? It's just laughing. How many times have we added information into all of our board packs? Because someone's like, oh yeah, I want to see this, I want to see that, and we've never taken, if it's one in, one out, they just get bigger and bigger.
They do, and I think it's the needle in the haystack. Then it's what's the important information. And look, I think boards, they may have long tenure from, clubs may have long tenure from boards, they may have long tenure from leadership, they may have long tenure from finance. So I think in this environment, given that we're looking for these efficiencies, I think it's on everyone, boards, leadership and staff, to really evaluate what reports they're doing, what data they're sharing. Is it adding value? Are you doing anything with it? Is it your role? I remember when I did the AICD course, the facilitator really drummed into everyone, your role as a director is strategy and risk. If it falls outside of that remit, it's probably operational. And so thinking about, reports are needed and by whom. I think this is probably a good point in time to really challenge that status quo, and probably from a management leadership point of view, work out whether or not you can have that conversation and say, we've got a culture of continuous improvement. So if you think there's a better way of doing this, or a report that will, simplify this or do this better, or if we don't need to do that again, I think it's really important we have those conversations. Okay, point made. So Greg, you work with many clubs on kind of that strategic perspective, looking at any opportunities for either development or investment and a whole range of areas. What are you seeing? Are you seeing a focus on revenue generation, cost management, both? What are the learnings from those who are approaching it strategically at the moment?
It's all of those. I think you can't segment any aspect of the business in any environment, but particularly in this one. If you look at the frameworks that we're working in, costs are increasing. The cost of doing business is increasing. So if you're not growing your business, your revenues, then effectively you will be going backwards. You might still be making a profit, but if you're not growing in scale, you're going to be going backwards. So most clubs, obviously what they're spending their money on depends on their capacity. But I think anyone that I talk to, and we have a planning meeting, it's all about maintaining the core business. That's always a part of it, and growing your business, whether it's gaming, food, beverage, provided it's profitable, is obviously essential to long-term viability. And you just can't get away from that. And the irony of our position as registered clubs is that the biggest revenue source and the most profitable revenue source, gaming, where we've got roughly 60 cents of every dollar of revenue converts to profit, is very hard to replace when the whole industry was built around having that revenue line, or the majority of the industry was. So if you ignore it, you do it at your peril. So you've got to focus on both revenue growth, cost management, maintaining those EBITDA percentages, but not at the expense of shrinking the business. You wouldn't want to say, well, let's increase our EBITDA. We can do that by reducing revenue, which is technically possible, but it's definitely not wise.
You need a long-term sustainable strategy. Yeah. Anyone doing anything exciting out there in terms of diversification? What are you seeing, Greg and Clayton, in that sort of sphere? Or, what are the popular diversification strategies?
Do you want me to go, Clayton, or do you want to have a word?
No, you can go.
It's pretty well anything. And it's a function of location, it's a function of resources, function of management, it's a function of the nature of the boards. And it's really how broad's your imagination in terms of some of the things that are being done. Some of them are truly unique into areas that I really shouldn't be talking publicly about some of my clients' unique strategies, so I won't. But they are creative. They look at their position and say, well, here's some money we will call at risk, which has a potential upside, which is in the interest of the club. And then there's the core type stuff, which are around property developments. The unfortunate position with property developments at the moment, with the cost of construction. I know of the three large projects that we've been involved with for a number of years, which have all been paused because the cost of construction has increased so significantly that the projects become marginal. So there's a whole range of things that impact on whether a development of some sort, whether it's seniors living, build to rent, build to sell, childcare, aged care, whether they work, and the market is definitely there, but it's whether you can get a margin out of it and you've got the capital, because all of those sorts of projects require significant equity to go in to start. You can't just do it all with debt. So yeah, I'm seeing diversification in many forms, and in some cases, there are clubs that are just not capable of it in any significant way because all of their resources go into maintaining the core business. They're just not big enough to do it, and that's probably a fact that has to be appreciated. I mean, just because someone else can do it doesn't mean everyone can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think Greg's probably touched on most of the common ones. I think in that process, as he said, I think there's some pressures around the whole. You know, a lot of it's been sort of build bigger and you know, add in more venues, more hotels, but that capital expenditure on those has become pretty significant to be able to make those viable over a short or medium term. Yeah, I think we've seen some interesting examples, I guess, of, without going into too much specifics, but yeah, I think generally the club industry's really looked at those core hospitality type things or things that are connected to their business, being it aged care, being it seniors living, being it childcare and stuff that sort of in and supports people in and around their membership. But there is nothing preventing the industry from looking outside hospitality in the industry and going into other businesses that support the general nature of the objectives of that business broadly. So, moving into a completely different sustainable business, and really it comes down to expertise, as Greg said. I think a lot of people that sit within the club industry obviously know what they're doing in the club industry and in hospitality, and that's generally where that diversification is focused on. But that doesn't prevent a business from going sideways into a completely different sector. Sustainability, it's just areas like that are really big growth areas, and we've seen some clients really investing heavily in sustainable projects that one day will be revenue generating for them and completely diversifies their business. Now, not everyone can do that. I fully take that point because typically the boards and senior management may not have the skill set or to be able to manage those sorts of things. But that doesn't mean that you can't though either. It's about over time changing the structure of the governance of clubs as well to have diversified skill set to be able to enable them to go into other areas, so that there is one of the best ways to manage risk of is really diversifying the industries that you're involved in, so that you don't have a situation like we had during COVID where you're 100% of your revenue streams are shut because of being entirely invested in hospitality. So I think there is ways of looking outside the box a little bit. It's about, but I think I wouldn't advise those are a good idea until the clubs are in a position, one from a sustainable financial position, but two, have the appropriate skill set. But that shouldn't be something that prevents them. I think it'll be diversifying revenue streams is a big topic when it comes to lenders and the whole ESG thing. They're expecting clubs to be thinking about what they can do to move away from the reliance on gaming. That's a reality. So, it definitely needs to form part of clubs' strategic plans one way or another.
Margo, I sit on as chairman of a number of risk and governance committees, and there's one club, I won't name it, but they've formed a subcommittee. Their diversification is nothing to do with hospitality. It's a process-driven thing, and part of it's in technology. So they've engaged an advisory board, which doesn't have a vote, and that's a group of people with skill sets that sit as a subcommittee and report to the board. They're not directors; they're paid as professionals, and they have input into what's going on. They observe whatever the activity is and provide a report to the board on a variety of issues around production capacity, market changes, factory setup, whatever it is. But they engage those separate skills specifically because they know they don't have them. And that's if you really want to go outside the box, you need to have skills that are completely outside the box too.
And sometimes you get what you're paid for. So interesting that they pay those people too. Okay, interesting. And look, I've seen everything when I go into clubs, in terms of what they do. Some clubs outsource everything, the cafe, all the things that they can, and some insource everything. So, I mean, I would imagine the operating models are so unique and different from club to club that, it's important to engage with corporate partners such as yourself to get a sense of what that broad view looks like. So interesting. Security, we kind of touched on cyber before in terms of, I guess, increased reporting and increased costs down the track. I know security is something that you focus on for clubs through Glory Global. Mel, can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, so I think a key part, there's sort of a couple of things around, say, where we are in that cash automation piece, and it is around the security of the physical cash, whether it's like the efficiency of automating it, having all through the compliance reporting integrated into finance back office. We know finance sort of is the key and the core to so many of the clubs. And really sort of focusing on just how you can be secure and have your staff feeling secure with that, whether that's how the floors are operated in the clubs, different models sort of with the ATMs and filling them, or having sort of the CIT providers. But in terms of because there are some of the more remote areas that are struggling to get some of the CIT collections, they're not sort of very reliable. So there are sort of absolutely things that can be done on the floors to help around the security and management of that physical cash. It's something that is we're seeing sort of everywhere that theft of money is on the rise in terms of some of that internal sort of theft, and unfortunately, sadly, sort of sign of the times that we're seeing it. And being able to secure it, and yes, through all the machines, the compliance and the reporting, you've got to be able to do that sort of quickly. But there's all sort of the other revenue streams. So whether it's we're talking about those cafes and the gyms and everything, and very much bringing that whole ecosystem together, and having the software to do that, forecast it. You can bring sort of costs down around the CITs, making sure that you're only sort of having collections at the times when you need it. So it's both kind of the security to take it away from employee theft, but then also the security of the teams who are using it, the less time that it's out there, being aware of anyone sort of coming in as well. We hear sort of more and more ingenious reports of people trying to get into some machines, whether it's they've gone into a centre and they've climbed up into the roof and they stayed there all night, and then they sort of come down a particular time, and then they've got caught because they've got a taxi outside. Sort of like, some of these people are very, very clever until right at the end. But having sort of everything secured away, I think, is key.
Sounds like peace of mind for the staff themselves with the cash handling, and also the clubs for that administration piece and all of those systems as well.
Yeah, and bringing all of those diversified, sort of say within the club or outside, reporting through together. So it can come through, can do your month-end reporting sort of within just sort of those first few days, because it's all there straight away. It's all linked, and off-site managers can have sort of an oversight, and where there are some clubs are sort of like the multi-sites, they can have a handle of what is happening in the club space as well, remotely through all of those sort of monitoring tools that link up. Adding into sort of all of the compliance that we've spoken about through today as being an absolute sort of key hot topic.
Interesting, thank you. Now, for the participants on the webinar, I just will point out the Q&A function. So if you want to ask our panelists a question, we'll probably keep going for another 5 minutes or so. So pop something in if you have a burning question. In the meantime, I might touch again on that piece around sort of some of those costs that we saw in COVID that were pared back. And I know that, Greg, you were mentioning we're seeing some of those come back online again. We were probably fortunate that consumer expectations, both members and non-members, shifted a little bit. So they were a little more okay with us paring back, any of those operations in order to make things work. But even at the time around skill shortages, sometimes it was to give the chefs a break or to give the staff a break, or the leadership team. And, even this morning I was at a club and they're actually just now closing on Mondays, which is a new thing for them. So do you think there are opportunities to look at some of those slippages again and take a bit of a hard line on some of those operations to make sure there's more efficiencies across the business?
Look, there is, but it's, the unfortunate part about doing business in a club, and please don't take this the wrong way, is that we have members, and those members think they have an entitlement to things by right. And it's easy for us to say we should wind these things back, but it becomes a political issue, unfortunately, in some clubs. Now, I think the ones that succeed on that remove the politics from the process and say, well, this is how we do business, this is how we need to do business in the modern world. But if you step back from the industry and maybe just have a look at a couple of comparisons that draw out why that changed view is necessary. In the last 27 years, the club industry has shrunk by 700 venues. At the same time, hotels have not. Their businesses are efficient. They don't have to cajole or deal with member sentiments around sense of entitlement. We do as an industry, and sometimes that comes at a price. And obviously, there's a number of clubs that have not been able to manage that they haven't been able to match their market, so hence they're no longer here. So that tension of juggling community aspirations or requirements and cost is a really difficult one for the industry to deal with, and that's probably one of the reasons why we see a shift in some market share in some respects. But there is a real lesson. A hotel is an inherently efficient enterprise. Clubs are not, because we've got all these other obligations and facets that impact on the business. I'd like to say, we should review it, and absolutely we should. But it's got to be done with some realism, and I think also an appreciation that if we just let it continue to run rampantly, we eventually pay a price, which means we're not competitive in our marketplace. We can't invest if we let the position of the club erode, profitability erode. We start a spiral, which means we can't invest, we can't maintain, we can't renew, and then that passes the business effectively to someone else who maybe doesn't have quite the focus on community and what they should give away. That's probably the logic to apply. So long answer to a short question. Yes, we should review it.
And look, I think that's why we have webinars like today, is to take stock and I guess put it out there that, boards, clubs look at what a more efficient business looks like. Like you say, hotels operate in a very different environment, and maybe we're too accommodating to our detriment sometimes. But I think it's taking all of those considerations into play. Okay, well, there's a financial and an operational consideration. There's a member engagement consideration. How many members will be impacted? Okay, what is our stakeholder relationship with them? Are they an exceptionally squeaky wheel, or is this, a legitimate concern? So I think it's, really having a full conversation with the appropriate people about what some of those changes might look like. But yeah, it's going to be a tougher environment, so I think it's worth doing.
Yep.
Okay, let me just check. No questions that I can see. Any other final points from the panel on business efficiencies, staff, systems and security?
I'm happy. Yeah, look, I think most things have been said. But look, I just think considering I think the headwinds the industry has in terms of compliance and requirements, I think there's going to be even more coming, particularly at finance teams and the teams in and around them in terms of data, reporting, compliance and risk. And so I think, the more you can begin to automate, look at systems and invest. I mean, I think what, George and I see is there's probably a reluctance on investment in systems because of price, but I think people don't realistically think about the cost benefit of what they may get through that investment as well into the future, because I think a realignment of people's roles and what they're going to be doing is necessary to be able to deal with what's coming. ESG, you can look at it from a reporting perspective, but ultimately what's going to be behind that is more and more data and more governance around that data and information. And what we've seen is that typically falls on the finance department because it's data, it's controls, there's systems, there's process that's in and around it, it's reporting. I think there's going to be a need to really start to rethink what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. And we see too often that things are done purely because that's the way they've always been done and that's the way we've always done it. So rather than questioning and having a bit of an open mind about how things could be done better, and I think the industry could benefit from, like Greg said, looking at hotels, but also looking outside the industry. Sometimes we see some of the people that come in with no prior experience in the industry coming into the industry are those that bring the best ideas sometimes because they haven't been, they've seen something from a different lens or perspective, and they bring that in, and that results in, significant improvements to whether it be reporting or, process or operations. So I think with what's coming, I think there's a big opportunity to take time now to look at what people are doing.
I think one of the things that really is a future focus, should be a focus, is scenario planning. So having amongst the toolkit of in your finance team the ability to run a number of scenarios that support your business plans. Well, what if, and what if we change this driver, we change this revenue line, we change this cost percentage, we play with all the variable costs in the business, look at what the impact is on cash flow, look at what the impact is on all of the debt covenants that the club might have, how it affects cash, and having the ability to look forward with a solid forecasting tool that they can work with relatively easily without having to spend a month or a week or 2 weeks creating a forecast. It's something that allows what if analysis when they're sitting around a table saying, well, here are the changes we can imagine in the business scenario or the environment. Let's see what we can do to see. Well, let's first see what it looks like, and then start to strategize what the response is.
I think also, we focused on a lot of cost control and systems and things like that, but there are other opportunities like, one scenario might be, and this is small scale, but, you've currently got a kids play centre and it's not pay to play, but what does it look like if you change that to pay to play, or we've got beverage partners, looking for efficiencies across staff in food and beverage. So, Debortley have a Prosecco on tap, or Cellar Control have products where you improve the cleanliness of your product so you get more more products, ready to drinks, all of those sorts of things. So I think, we've spoken about a range of products and services or ways around system security, but there's also other efficiencies right across the business, ways that you can be preparing food that's, a lot more low maintenance, those sorts of things. So, Mel, any last thoughts from your perspective?
I think just building on those sort of two other areas, about the governance, compliance, and going into that sort of scenario planning, thinking about anything that you touch repeatedly. I think just absolutely keeping that mind of automation, integration, reconciliation piece. How many Excel spreadsheets do we all still do, and can we get away with? I think in terms of those systems and processes, take what human factors can we actually help to replace with tools where it's not reliant on one number being touched into something else, because we all have fat fingers over the times. Mistakes happen because we're human. What else can we look to streamline that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to our panelists, Mel, Greg, Clayton and George. Some very interesting concepts covered, and I really appreciate your ongoing support of the association and your valued comments today. Thank you so much. Also, the association has our Veteran and Community Engagement Forum on the 4th of March at the Eveleigh Club. Members are 295 and non-members are 425, so I'd encourage you to register. We've got a really full and dynamic program, which is great. And we've got our golf day on the 8th of April at Linwood Country Club, so registrations for that will be open soon. But without further ado, thank you to my panelists. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and all the best.